Oh, her warning.
Yeah, this is a girl who says that man
well,
has trouble.
This did happen to me, and it was a he. And I went right ahead and married the guy, and it was Gary.
Everyone knew her as the woman who made the world laugh. The brilliant red-haired force of nature who built an empire from a television soundstage, who turned slapstick into an art form, who proved that a woman could run a studio, a network, and a legacy all at once. To the public, Lucille Ball was warmth itself, endlessly funny, fiercely capable, and eternally beloved. But Lucy had spent decades watching Hollywood from a rare vantage point, powerful enough to see everything, shrewd enough to remember it all. And before she left this world, she spoke what she said about the women she'd witnessed up close. The icons, the legends, the untouchable names, was nothing like the version of Hollywood anyone had been sold. This is the story of what Lucy saw when the cameras stopped rolling, and the most surprising part isn't who made her list. It's how consistent her verdict was. Every single time, there are performers the public worships, and then there are people. Lucy understood the difference better than almost anyone alive. She had built her career not on mystique or manufactured glamour, but on discipline, precision, and an almost ruthless work ethic. She arrived on time. She knew her lines. She treated her crew with the same respect she extended to studio executives. In a Hollywood that chewed through women and spat them out before 40, she had survived by being utterly, uncompromisingly reliable. That standard, the way you treat people who cannot do anything for you, became the measuring rod she carried through every encounter, every rehearsal, every industry dinner. By that standard, she would judge the greatest names of the Golden Age. And by that standard, she found many of them wanting picture a television soundstage in 1971. The cameras are being calibrated, the lighting crew making minute adjustments to the overhead rigs. Lucy is already there. She always was. The guest scheduled for today's episode of Hear Us Lucy has yet to arrive, but her demands have preceded her by several days. The studio temperature must be held at precisely 68 degrees. Her chair must be angled with mathematical exactness. The lighting must be sculpted to flatter the left side of her face. Joan Crawford had been Hollywood royalty for so long that royalty had simply become her natural state. To the public, she was the apotheosis of old Hollywood glamour, poised, porcelain imperious in the most admirable way. Lucy didn't begrudge her the requests. Stars made requests. That was the arrangement. What she was not prepared for was what happened next. A wardrobe assistant, 22 years old, nervous in the way only the very young and very earnest can be, brought Crawford a gown with a single barely visible wrinkle near the hem. Crawford looked at the dress, then she looked at the girl, and then she destroyed her. Not with one word, but with several, delivered in the precise clipped cadence of someone who had rehearsed contempt until it was effortless. The young woman left the set in tears. Crawford demanded she be fired. Lucy refused. What stayed with Lucy longer than the cruelty itself was what came immediately after. The moment the director called action, Crawford transformed. Radiant, charming, magnetic. Every watt of her legendary warmth turned on like a switch. Lucy watched the performance from just off camera, and something shifted inside her permanently. Later, she confided to a friend in a tone stripped of any drama. "I've worked with department store mannequins who felt more human to Lucille Ball. Coldness was one thing. She could accept coldness. Hollywood was full of it. But calculated warmth, kindness deployed only when a camera was present, struck her as something far more troubling. A character," she concluded, "revealed itself not in the moments it chose to perform generosity, but in the moments it thought no one important was watching." Joan Crawford had failed that test completely, and Lucy never forgot it. Yet when the conversation turned to Judy Garland, the temperature in the room changed entirely. There was no fire in Lucy's voice when she spoke about Garland, only the quiet, almost exhausted register of someone grieving a waste too large to fully name. Lucy had known Judy since their early days together at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, two young women in a studio system that had little patience for either of them on their worst days. She had admired Garland's voice with the unreserved reverence of someone who understood, better than most, how rare that kind of talent actually was. On a stage, Judy Garland didn't perform so much as release something, a quality of emotion so unguarded, it could silence a room of the most jaded people in show business. But Lucy had also witnessed what that gift cost the people who worked around it. A television director once described to her a morning that had started at 5 a.m. Crew assembled, lights set, cameras ready, the entire complicated machinery of a production holding its breath for its star. Garland arrived nearly 9 hours later. She was, by every account, luminous, apologetic and warm and incandescent in the way that made everyone in the room remember instantly why they'd waited for 30 minutes. She delivered a performance of staggering quality. Then she stopped, said she was too tired to continue, and left. The following day, 3 crew members, people with mortgages and families and no famous name to protect them, were terminated because the budget had buckled under the weight of her absence. That, Lucy said, was the part she could never absorb. She had clawed her way through decades of an industry quick to discard women who faltered even once. She had survived by being so ruthlessly dependable that no one could ever justify replacing her. To watch someone with Garland's extraordinary talent leave wreckage behind her, and then watch ordinary people absorb the financial consequences, felt like a betrayal of something fundamental. Talent should never excuse destruction. She said it quietly, without malice, at a private dinner. She said it like someone who had spent a long time arriving at a simple truth. When Garland died in 1969, Lucy mourned the voice the world had lost. But she never pretended the chaos hadn't happened. If Garland stirred sadness in Lucy, Ava Gardner stirred something closer to revulsion, and the distinction mattered. Because Lucy had never confused tragedy with cruelty, Gardner was neither. In the mid-1960s, during a wardrobe fitting at MGM, a young assistant brought Gardner a freshly steamed gown. The seam had softened slightly, barely perceptible, the kind of imperfection that lived at the very edge of visibility. Gardner studied it for a moment, then she studied the girl. "Don't bother fixing it," she said, her voice as smooth and controlled as everything else about her. "You can fix incompetence with more incompetence." Lucy was standing close enough to see the young woman's face go rigid, the particular stillness of someone trying not to fall apart in public. Later, to a trusted confidant, Lucy described what she'd seen in terms that had clearly been clarifying in her mind for some time. Ava didn't make mistakes, she made victims. The rupture between the two women became permanent after an industry party where Gardner, speaking to a group across a crowded room, referred to Lucille Ball, one of the most powerful women in the history of American television, as, and the room heard it clearly, the washed-up clown. Gardner said it with the particular ease of someone who had never once considered that the target might be listening. Or, perhaps more chillingly, had considered it entirely. Lucy later said, with controlled precision, that if Gardner had not been so extraordinarily beautiful, far fewer people in Hollywood would have tolerated what lay beneath it. Beauty, she observed, had always been one of the industry's most effective insulations against accountability. Gardner had used it fluently even in her final years. Whenever Ava Gardner's face appeared in a documentary or a magazine spread, Lucy would look at it for a moment and say quietly, "People have no idea what she was behind that face." Bette Davis presented a different problem entirely. With Crawford, Lucy had seen cold indifference. With Gardner, calculated cruelty. With Davis, she believed she was witnessing something that could only be described as enjoyment. At an industry dinner in the mid-1960s, Lucy watched Davis berate a young waiter who had brought an incorrect bottle of wine. The mistake was minor. The response was not. Davis continued past the point of correction and into something that felt, to Lucy watching from nearby, almost leisurely, as if she were savoring the young man's increasing discomfort. The room fell quiet in that particular way rooms do when the person with the most status in them is doing something the rest of the room knows is wrong, but cannot bring themselves to interrupt. When Davis caught Lucy's eye across the room afterward and raised her glass in a small, ambiguous toast, Lucy didn't return it. Later that night, she articulated to someone close to her the precise difference she had observed. Crawford was cold. Davis seemed to enjoy delivering the wound. For Lucy, that distinction was not semantic, it was moral. Coldness was a failure of warmth. Enjoyment was something else entirely, something that implicated character at a level she found deeply unsettling. She remained polite in every public context they shared thereafter. She was never close. The final name on Lucy's list produced a reaction that surprised the people who heard it, because it was the only one that made her laugh. Zaza Gabor, with her theatrical accent and diamond-encrusted public persona, had always struck Lucy as a performance so total it had consumed the performer entirely. This was to the cool artificiality of Crawford or the sharp deliberateness of Gardner. This was something more elaborate, a woman who had constructed a character and then moved into it permanently, using it as both costume and weapon. At a charity event in the late 1960s, Lucy watched Gaber arrive in a cascade of flash photography and fur, working the entrance like someone who had been practicing it since birth. The moment the cameras disappeared, so did something else. A volunteer stepped forward to guide her to her table. Gaber looked at him and said without lowering her voice, "I don't sit with peasants." Moments later, a young volunteer barely 20 years old accidentally grazed Gaber's coat while passing. Gaber leaned in close, wearing a serene smile, and murmured that if the girl touched her coat again, she would make certain she never worked another event in this city. It was the smile that disturbed Lucy most. She told a colleague afterward that nothing about Gabor felt real to her. Not the accent, not the elegance, not the warmth she displayed so fluently whenever it served her. And she offered what she clearly considered her final judgment on the matter. Fake kindness is worse than open cruelty. A cruel person reveals themselves. A person who smiles while hiding contempt can fool the whole world. When Gaber slapped a Beverly Hills police officer in 1989, and the cameras captured it all, Lucy reportedly was not surprised. She simply observed that the world was finally seeing what she had been watching for 30 years. What Lucille Ball left behind, in the end, was not a list of enemies. It was a philosophy. She had watched the most celebrated women of her generation from close range, had seen what they did when the audience wasn't looking, and had arrived at a conclusion so simple it was almost uncomfortable. The truest measure of anyone's character is how they treat a person who has nothing to offer them. By that measure, talent was not sufficient. Beauty was not sufficient. Legacy was not sufficient. None of it substituted for the basic human choice of whether to extend decency to someone standing below you on the ladder. Lucy had made that choice again and again across a 50-year career. She had built an empire and treated the people inside it like human beings. It had not always been the easier path. The women she spoke about were not simple villains. They were complex, brilliant, damaged, extraordinary people shaped by an industry that rewarded performance over sincerity and taught power to become its own justification. They deserved to be remembered for what they created. They also deserved to be remembered fully. Lucy remembered them fully. That, perhaps, was the most honest thing about her? What do you think? Does this change how you see any of these legends? And does Hollywood today hide personalities like this any better than it once did? Leave your thoughts in the comments. If you find yourself drawn to the quieter, more complicated truths behind classic Hollywood, subscribe and turn on notifications, because the stories worth telling are rarely the ones on the surface.